The joke was made on a Wednesday evening in November, and every man at the long table in the Whitfield dining room laughed, and Mrs. Dunmore smiled the way a person smiles when they are certain they have done something kind. The only one who did not react at all was Commodore Whitfield, who picked up his wine glass, set it down and said, "As you like," and the conversation moved on to other things. What came through the door of that dining room the following evening was a woman in a deep slate blue traveling suit with ivory buttons at the wrist, and two people at that table knew whose suit it was before she had let go of the handle. But I should begin at the beginning. Tell me in the comments what city you're in tonight. I read every one of them. And if stories like this are what you come here for, subscribe. It costs you nothing. Imogen Calloway had worked in the back office of Whitfield Shipping for 3 years and 4 months when the dinner happened. She had come to the company in the spring of 1886, 4 months after her father's death, carrying a letter from his former employer attesting that Mr. Calloway's daughter had kept her father's books since the age of 15 and was, in the writer's opinion, a more reliable accountant than 3/4 of the men he had ever hired from the university. The letter had been written by a man who did not sign his full name to it, which told Imogen everything she needed to know about how much he was willing to stake on her behalf. She took the position of junior ledger clerk anyway, because she had $42 in a tin box and no other prospects, and because the numbers themselves did not care what she wore or where she sat. She sat in the back office. There were 4 ledger clerks total, and Imogen was the only woman, and she was paid accordingly. The head bookkeeper, Mr. Hatch, was a careful man with no imagination, which meant his figures were always correct and never quite right. He balanced to the penny every quarter and never once saw the larger pattern underneath. Imogen had seen it in her first month and said nothing, on the sound principle that nobody who announces she can do her supervisor's job keeps that supervisor's goodwill for long. She began correcting the errors quietly. Not large errors. Mr. Hatch did not make large errors. But there were gaps in the way the shipping contracts were structured, clauses that would cost the company money in ways that Mr. Hatch's method would not catch until it was too late. She corrected them in pencil in the margin, in a hand small enough to be mistaken for annotation, and she said nothing to anyone. In February of 1888, Commodore Whitfield had come into the back office at 7:15 in the morning, which no one had expected, and had taken the St. Lawrence ledger from the shelf, and stood at the window reading it for about 12 minutes, and then put it back and left without speaking to anyone. Mr. Hatch found the ledger on the wrong shelf afterward and could not explain it. Imogen had not been in the office that morning. She heard about it from the junior clerk over lunch. She understood immediately what it meant, and it went through her like cold water, because it meant the Commodore had read the corrections and had said nothing for the 8 months since she had made them, and she could not decide if that was a very good thing or a very dangerous one. She was 26 years old, with no money and no family of consequence, and no way of knowing whether a man like the Commodore considered her work an asset or an inconvenience he had not yet decided what to do about. The dinner was held on the Thursday before Thanksgiving, 1889. There were 12 men at the table, and Mrs. Dunmore, who was the late Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield's younger sister, and visited twice a year from Boston, and took every opportunity to remind the room of what it owed to the Whitfield name. The dinner was for investors in a new coastal route, and there was nothing unusual about it until the port was poured, and Mrs. Dunmore leaned forward and said, brightly, "I hear you keep something of a financial prodigy in your back office, James, one of the ledger girls." Commodore Whitfield did not say anything. "Do you mean to keep her there forever?" Mrs. Dunmore continued. "It seems almost wasteful. Why not have her come up and explain the Hudson River contracts to Mr. Sherrill? He's been trying to understand them for a week." She smiled at the investor in question. "If a bookkeeper can manage it, surely the rest of us can." There was a sound at the table, a ripple of polite laughter, the kind that fills a room because everyone has decided to be amused, rather than wait to see if they should be. "That is not a kindness," said a Mr. Beaumont at the far end quietly. He was the only person at that table Imogen afterward thought well of. "I don't mean it as a cruelty," Mrs. Dunmore said. "I mean it as a test. If the girl knows the contracts, she can explain them and everyone will be charmed, and we'll all have something interesting to talk about for a week. If she doesn't, no harm done. Either way, James gets a pleasant evening." Commodore Whitfield looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his glass. "As you like," he said. Imogen Calloway was in the building. That was the thing no one at that table had considered for a single moment, because a ledger clerk working late in the back office is not in the building in any sense that matters to people at a dinner table. She had been there since 6, finishing the quarterly reconciliation, and Mrs. Paget, the office manager, had come to find her at 8:15 with a face that could not quite hold itself steady. "You've been asked to attend the dinner," Mrs. Paget said. "Upstairs, the dining room." Imogen set down her pen. "By whom?" Mrs. Dunmore made the suggestion. The Commodore agreed. Mrs. Paget's hands were entirely still, which told Imogen it had taken effort to make them so. "I want you to know I attempted to send word that you had already gone for the evening. I was told that your coat was on the rack in the hall, and that this was insufficient." Imogen sat with that for a moment. "I could be ill," she said. "You could," Mrs. Paget agreed. "And then you would be the ledger girl who was too frightened to come upstairs, and that would be the story told about you in this building for as long as you work here." She paused. "Or you might not." Imogen had known what she would do before Mrs. Paget had finished speaking. She was not frightened of the questions. That was the part she could never fully explain, not even to herself. She had reconciled the Hudson River contracts in October, and had found 3 things in them that the attorneys had missed, and had written a summary that she put in the Commodore's mail tray and never been acknowledged for. She was not afraid of 12 men asking her to explain a shipping contract. She was afraid of the doorway. She was afraid of walking into that room in her grey wool dress with the ink stain on the left cuff that would not quite come clean, and standing there while 12 men and Mrs. Dunmore looked at her, and knowing for the rest of her life exactly what she had looked like doing it. Mrs. Paget looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Come with me. I have been thinking about something since 8 o'clock, and I have decided, and if I'm let go for it, then I'm let go." The suit was in the wardrobe in the private anteroom off the main corridor, a traveling suit in deep slate blue, the wool as fine as anything Imogen had ever touched, with ivory buttons at the cuff and a narrow ivory stripe at the collar. Mrs. Paget took it out and held it up without speaking for a moment. "Whose is that?" Imogen asked. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield's," said Mrs. Paget. "She wore it to every board meeting she ever attended. The last one was in October of 1885, 2 months before she died." She turned the jacket slowly. "She was 5'4" and slight with your exact shoulders. I have been looking at you across this office for 3 years thinking it." "Mrs. Paget," Imogen said, "I cannot." "You can. I cannot wear a dead woman's suit into a room where they mean to make a spectacle of me." Imogen's voice was not quite steady. "Think what it does to him. He has to sit at his own table and watch a ledger clerk walk in wearing his wife's clothes in front of 12 investors, and he cannot say one word about it." Mrs. Paget laid the jacket over her arm. "I have thought about that since 8 o'clock, she said, "and I want you to hear what I decided. Then you may do as you please, because it is your Thursday, not mine." She sat down in the chair by the wardrobe. "I have been in this company since Eleanor Whitfield was alive," she said. "I watched her run the household accounts and the company accounts both for 3 years, and I have not heard her name said aloud in this building since December of 1885, because he does not say it and everyone takes their lead from him. She was the one who designed the accounting system that Mr. Hatch has been using incorrectly ever since." Her chin was level. "He said nothing on Wednesday night. Mr. Hatch told me. He sat at his own table and let that woman suggest you be brought up like a performing dog. And he said as you like, and I have not slept." She stood. "So he is going to sit at that table, and he is going to have to look at something. And it is not going to be a woman in grey wool with an ink stain, because a woman in grey wool with an ink stain is something a man can feel sorry about for a week and then put out of his mind." "Let him look at Eleanor's suit," said Mrs. Paget, "and let him remember that she would have stood up from that table on Wednesday night and taken Mrs. Dunmore apart in front of every last one of them. And every person in this building who knew her knows it." The jacket fit through the shoulders and was half an inch short in the sleeve. Mrs. Paget turned the cuff once and pinned it. At 8:40 on Thursday, November 21st, 1889, Imogen Calloway stood outside the dining room of the Whitfield house on Fifth Avenue with her hand on the door handle. She stood there for 4 seconds. Then she opened the door. 12 men were at the table, and the room was very bright, and she heard the conversation stop the way water stops when you put your hand over a pipe, Mrs. Dunmore had turned around with a smile already arranged, and Imogen watched the smile arrive and then fail, not dim, fail, as the woman's eyes moved from Imogen's face down to the ivory buttons at her cuff and back up again. At the near end of the table, Commodore Whitfield turned in his chair to see who had come in. He was 44 years old and had been 4 years a widower, and Imogen watched him see the suit and go entirely, completely still. Not startled. Something older than startled. He put his hand flat on the tablecloth and did not move it. "Good evening," said Imogen Calloway. "I understand there's a question about the Hudson River contracts." She had not expected the place setting. That was the thing she had not prepared for, a chair pulled out at the near end, a card in a footman's hand because a place had been laid for her, the moment Mrs. Dunmore had said bring her up, and no one had thought about it again since. She sat down. For 5 seconds nobody said anything, and it was the longest thing she had ever lived through. "Miss Calloway," said Commodore Whitfield. His voice was not entirely right, and every person at the table heard it. "Where did you get that suit?" There it was. Imogen had known it was coming. She had sat on the back stairs at 7:30 and decided exactly what she was going to do, which was say the full truth with nothing around it. "Mrs. Paget gave it to me this evening, sir, from the wardrobe in the anteroom. She told me whose it was before I put it on, and I asked her twice to let me wear my own clothes, and she would not. She said that if she was dismissed for it, then she was dismissed. I would like that said in front of everyone at this table before anything else is said." Commodore Whitfield set his water glass down. "No one is being dismissed." "Thank you, sir." He stopped. He was having difficulty, and Imogen could see it, and so could everyone else. "Calloway, I am not going to discuss this at this table." "No, sir." "Then," said Mrs. Dunmore brightly into the silence, "the Hudson River contracts." Imogen turned to her. She had thought about the questions for about 20 minutes on the back stairs, and then had stopped, because she had understood that thinking about the questions was the trap. A wrong answer was what everyone had come for. A right answer was a performing dog doing its trick, which was the same entertainment with better manners. She had decided to do a third thing entirely. "Before you ask," said Imogen Calloway, "may I say something? It will be brief." Mrs. Dunmore opened her hand. "Go ahead." "You invited me up here because you assumed that a woman working in the back office of a shipping company either knows just enough to be amusing or not enough to be embarrassing. You said as much at this table on Wednesday evening when I was in the building. She let that settle. I was in the building. I have been in this building for 3 years. That is the first thing I wanted said." Somebody's fork went quiet. "The second is that I am not ashamed of what I know, and I will answer whatever I am asked as well as I am able. But I would like this table to understand that I know exactly what this is, and that I came anyway, and that I am not confused about it, because tomorrow you will all say she was a good sport and didn't mind, and I would rather you said she knew perfectly well and came anyway." No one spoke. Mrs. Dunmore had gone a slow, deep red, and Imogen watched it happen and felt no pleasure at all in it, which surprised her considerably. "That was 2 things, said Mr. Beaumont from the far end in a careful voice. "You said brief." "You're right," said Imogen. "The third is this. The Hudson River contracts as they were presented to you in September contain an error in the settlement clause of the St. Lawrence Addendum. It is not a fraud. It is a drafting error, and it will cost this company somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 in arbitration if it goes uncorrected." She brought the papers. She placed them on the table. "I have the corrected figures. I finished them last week. I put a copy in the Commodore's mail tray on November 14th. No one moved. Then Mr. Sherrill, the investor who had supposedly been unable to understand the contracts for a week, picked up the papers and read the first page. Then the second. He looked up. "This is correct," he said. He said it to the table, not to Imogen, but he said it. 11 people began talking at once. The dinner lasted an hour and 40 minutes. Imogen was asked, in the end, 4 questions about the coastal route by a Mr. Garrison who was 68 and had once known her father, and they talked for the better part of the salad course about freight insurance, and it was the best conversation she'd had in 3 years. Mrs. Dunmore did not speak to her again. At 10 o'clock the company rose. Imogen rose with them and understood immediately that she could not follow the women into the drawing room, and could not go back down to the ledger office in that suit either. Mrs. Paget appeared in the corridor, somehow, and took her arm. "Come sit in the small office with me for half an hour," she said. "Don't argue. I am 53 years old, and I just watched you tell 12 investors that their lead attorney made a $50,000 drafting error, and you're going to sit down before your legs give out." Imogen sat in the small office and her hands shook for 9 minutes. "The suit," said Mrs. Paget when the shaking stopped. "Eleanor chose that blue because she said Navy made men trust you and Slate made them listen. She wore it the day she told the board that the Pacific account had been losing money for 2 years, and that looking into it was not what she had in mind. She looked at the fire. She had the figures in a leather case, same as you." "She sounds remarkable," Imogen said. "She was," said Mrs. Paget. "She was my employer for 3 years, and I put her in her coffin, and I have not been able to say her name in this building since, because he doesn't say it, and no one says what he does not say. Commodore Whitfield sent for her at 10 the next morning. Imogen went in her own grey wool dress, because she had thought about it for most of the night, and had decided that going in anything else would be a kind of argument. He was standing at the window and did not turn around for a moment. "Calloway." "Sir." "I have been awake since 3, he said, "and I have written 8 letters that I burned, and I am going to do this very badly, and I would be grateful if you would let me get to the end before you say anything." "Yes, sir." "On Wednesday evening, a woman at my table suggested that an employee of mine be brought upstairs and made to account for herself in front of 12 men for sport." He turned around. He looked like a man who had not been to bed, which was accurate, and I said, "As you like. I have spent 2 days trying to find a version of that I can live with, and there isn't one." I did not stop her because stopping her would have required making a scene in my own dining room, and I would rather have had you humiliated on Thursday than have been uncomfortable on Wednesday. That is the whole of it. There is no part of it I can dress. Imogen said nothing. "I have been 4 years not making scenes," he said. "It is the one thing I have gotten good at." He came away from the window. "Now the suit. I want to say 2 things, and the first is that Paget was right, and I have told her so this morning. She has been in this company since Eleanor was alive, and she watched me refuse to say my wife's name for 4 years, and she took the only means available to her to make me look at what I had been doing. It worked." His jaw was tight. "I have not been so angry in 4 years, and I have not once been angry with her." "Sir, I should never have." "You should have, and you did. And you did it in front of the 12 men in New York most likely to understand exactly what a woman walking through that door in that suit meant." He put his hands behind his back. "Calloway, do you know what I did last night? I sat at my own table and watched you in Eleanor's suit and could not say one word, and every man in that room believed I was appalled at the presumption. And I was not appalled." He stopped. "I have not seen that color in 4 years, he said. "That is the whole of it. I am telling you because you are the only person alive who is entitled to know why I could not answer you at my own table." The hall clock struck the quarter. "Now," said Commodore Whitfield, "what I am going to offer you, and then what I am going to tell you, and I would ask you to hear both before you say no." Imogen waited. "I want to create the position of Chief Financial Officer of Whitfield Shipping. I want it to be yours. $80 a month, your own office, and your name on the company letterhead. That is the offer. I am also going to tell you that I have known about the corrections in the ledgers since February of 1888. Mr. Hatch found the amended figures and could not account for them. I knew whose hand it was. I said nothing for 20 months. He looked at her directly, because making your work visible would have required explaining why a junior ledger clerk was doing the work of a chief officer, and explaining that would have required me to admit that I had been reading your marginal notes for nearly 2 years, and I did not want to be the man who looked like he had been watching a woman in his employ." Imogen Calloway looked at him for a long moment. "May I say something hard?" "Please." "You did not send for me this morning because of Thursday," she said. "You have wanted someone to take this position for 4 years. You have been looking for a person who could do it, and there has been a ledger clerk correcting your accounts since the spring of 1887, and you have known it since early 1888, and you said nothing for 20 months. And then on Wednesday night, Mrs. Dunmore said, 'Bring her up,' and some part of you thought, not in words, I do not think it was words, but some part of you thought, 'This is how it happens, without me having to be the one who does it.' The Commodore did not answer. A man does not sit at his own table and say as you like about something he is entirely opposed to, said Imogen Calloway. I have had a night and a morning to figure out why you did not stop her, and that is the only answer I can find that fits. She had never in her life spoken to a man of his standing in that way. She heard herself and could not have stopped. Commodore Whitfield came and sat down in the chair across from hers. He put his hands over his face. When he took them away, he was very pale. Yes, he said. I have known it since about 4 this morning. I wanted you in that room and I did not want to be the man who put you there. So I let a woman I have no respect for do it for me, and it cost you everything, and it cost me nothing until Paget made it cost me something. Neither of them said anything for a while. That is worse than what I thought you had done, said Imogen. Yes, he said, it is considerably worse, which is why I am going to say the rest of it now. The offer stands, whatever you think of me. If you take it from a man who did that, and you will know it, and I am not going to pretend that a salary makes it into something else. Imogen Calloway said yes on the 1st of December. She said yes for 3 reasons, and she wrote them down that night in the back of the quarterly ledger she kept as her own copy, and the page was found among her papers when she died in 1931. 1. Because I want it. I have wanted it since my first month here, and there is no use pretending I am doing anyone a kindness. 2. Because there is no one else in this building who will do it as it should be done. 3. Because it is $80 a month, and I have $11 and a tin box, and I will not be a woman who says no to $80 a month to keep her pride tidy. She added a 4th reason some time later in different ink. 4. Because he told me the truth about himself when he did not have to. I have never once in my life been able to walk away from a person who does that. The trouble came in the spring of 1891, in the form of a letter from a Boston law firm that Commodore Whitfield read at his desk and put down without a word. My late wife's sister has written to her attorney, he said, and the attorney has written to mine, and it comes to 9 lines, which are these, that there is a young woman of uncertain background living on this company's salary and working in a private capacity with an unmarried man of means, and that in the event of any formal arrangement arising from that situation, the family would consider it their duty to ensure such an arrangement was subject to scrutiny regarding its origins. They think you mean to marry me, said Imogen. They have been told so. Mrs. Dunmore, who has been suggesting it in Boston for 18 months. He was very calm, which alarmed Imogen more than if he had not been. What they are doing, it is in the 9th line, and it is very carefully put, is establishing on the record, in writing, that any such marriage would be the result of an improper arrangement begun on the evening of November 21st, 1889. He looked at her on the evening of the dinner, which 12 men attended, 4 of whom will remember exactly what you were wearing. Imogen Calloway did not sleep that night. By 4 in the morning she had understood 2 things. The first was that they were going to lose the argument. Not a marriage, no one could prevent that, but the letter already existed, and it would outlive everyone who could contradict it, and there is nothing in this world so durable as an accusation that has been properly filed. The second was that she had been building the answer for 14 months, without knowing what she was building. She was at the office at 5:30. Commodore Whitfield found her there at 7. Sit down, sir, she said. I have been here 2 hours and I have it, and I want to say it in order, or I'll lose the thread. He sat. They are going to say that this arrangement began on November 21st, 1889, and every fact they will put forward is true. A ledger clerk was brought to a dinner table. She was given a position the next morning. She has worked in a private office with the owner of the company for 14 months. There is nothing in that we can deny. So we don't answer it, said Imogen Calloway. We publish it. He looked at her. The annual reports, she said. She turned the ledger book around. 14 months of accounts, every entry initialed and dated in my hand because you told me to on my first day, and I have never missed one. Signed quarterly by Mr. Garrison's firm, reviewed by the board. She kept her voice steady. It is not a defense, it is a record. It says what I have been doing in this office every day for 14 months, in ink, in order. And it cannot be altered after the fact, and any certified accountant would say so in 10 minutes. You want them printed. I want the full annual report printed and distributed to every financial paper in this city, and I want it to say on the title page exactly what it is. Accounts of Whitfield Shipping Company, 1890. prepared by Imogen Calloway, Chief Financial Officer. And I want last year's pulled from the board files and distributed alongside it with the date it was signed, which is 3 months before anyone claims this arrangement became improper. Commodore Whitfield was very still. Her name, said Imogen, and the date, and the numbers, which are correct, and which any man in the financial press can verify, so that when someone in Boston takes out that letter and reads improper arrangement, there will be 2 years of certified accounts sitting in newspaper offices with dates on every page that say exactly what the arrangement actually was. He sat without speaking for about 10 seconds. You have been building an alibi for 14 months, he said, and you did not know it. I have been keeping accurate records, said Imogen Calloway. It only became the other thing at 4 this morning. The reports were distributed in June of 1891. 3 financial papers ran notices. The Commercial Gazette gave the 1890 accounts 6 lines and called them a model of clarity, then spent 4 more lines on an appended note Imogen had written for the freight insurance section, which the reviewer described as the most useful 3 paragraphs he had read in a quarterly report all year. Mrs. Dunmore's letter was never produced, no claim was ever made. The letter presumably sits in a file in Boston still. Imogen Calloway and James Whitfield, Commodore, were married at the Church of the Heavenly Rest on the 3rd of January, 1892, 14 months after the first annual report was distributed. That timing was Imogen's, and she was immovable on it. Not before the second report, she said, and she said it once and did not say it again, and he did not argue. She explained it to Mrs. Paget 3 days before the wedding, over tea in the small office. A woman who takes a position in October and marries the man who created it in March has taken the position because she wanted to marry him. A woman who takes the position in October and marries him 15 months later, after 2 certified annual reports with her name on them, has done 2 entirely separate things. The whole difference between those 2 women is 14 months, and whether anyone ever takes her work seriously. Mrs. Paget did not say anything. She poured a second cup of tea. Mrs. Paget remained office manager at Whitfield Shipping until 1903. She and Imogen never discussed the suit again, with one exception. In December of 1895, 10 years after Eleanor Whitfield's death, Mrs. Paget came into the main office with the afternoon mail and said, apropos of nothing, she would have liked you. I know, said Imogen Calloway Whitfield. She would have argued with every note you put in those annual reports. I know that too, said Imogen, and I have spent 9 years wishing she had been alive to do it. In 1893, going through a locked cabinet in the private office, Imogen found Eleanor Whitfield's original accounting notebooks, 3 of them, covering 1882 to 1885. Eleanor had designed the entire double-entry system the company still used. She had also written in the margins in pencil, in a small quick hand, in a column beside the entries that was entirely her own. Pacific account Q3 1884. We are losing money on this and have been for 18 months, and James does not want to hear it. I will give him 1 more quarter. Atlantic Freight Q1 1885, fixed finally. Payroll Q4 1885. If I am not here to do this next year, God help them. She had not been there the next year. Imogen turned to the last page Eleanor had written, dated October 1885, and sat with it for a long time. Then she took out her own pen and wrote at the top of the next blank page in her own hand. Begun again this day. I did not know her. I have read her handwriting for 2 years. I am going to try to be worth continuing it. The Whitfield accounts, prepared by Eleanor Whitfield and continued by Imogen Calloway Whitfield, are held by the New York Historical Society. The notebooks, 2 women's hands 8 years apart, the same columns, the same careful ink, are in a glass case in the reading room. The change comes at the page dated January 14, 1893, where the handwriting shifts, and there is a line at the top that is not an accounting entry at all, and that the Historical Society catalogued separately, and that has been quoted rather more than you might expect from a line written in a shipping company's margin book. And once in a while, in the evenings, her husband would look up from whatever he was reading and ask the thing he never quite stopped asking. If Paget had not gone to that wardrobe, if you had walked through that door in the grey wool with the ink on the cuff. And Imogen, who had thought about this for 30-odd years, would put down her pen and say, then Mrs. Dunmore would have asked me her questions, and I would have answered them, and Mr. Garrison would have told me his story about freight insurance, and everyone would have been perfectly charmed. And I would have gone back down to the ledger office at 10 o'clock and been a junior clerk for another 20 years. It was never the questions, James. I could always do the questions. Then what was it? It was that you could not speak, said Imogen. You sat at your own table and could not get a word out in front of 12 men, and every one of them thought it was horror, and I stood in that doorway and knew it was not. I have never been so certain of anything in my life, and I have spent 30-some years finding out whether I was right. And were you? You have asked me that for 30 years, said Imogen Calloway, and I am not going to tell you, because the day I do you will stop asking. Now I want to tell you what I have turned over since I first came across this story. The Commodore admitted it himself, the morning after the dinner. Some part of him let Mrs. Dunmore make her joke on Wednesday, because it moved Imogen Calloway out of the back office and into the room where she belonged, without him having to be the man who crossed a line to put her there. It cost her a night of public humiliation and 2 years of whispers in Boston. It cost him nothing until Mrs. Paget made it cost him something. He told Imogen the truth about all of it when he did not have to. She said it was worse than what she had thought he'd done, and she took the job anyway. Should she have? Or should she have walked out of that office and never looked back? I go back and forth on it, and I'd like to know where you land. Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.